I'm Star Parker, and welcome to Cure America, Part 2. We're going to talk about the state of Black America. And listening to all the rhetoric in the popular media, you would think America is the most unfair, racist nation in the world. You would think that Black Americans are uniformly living in oppression and poverty with no hope for a future, save the federal government arriving on the scene to their rescue. But in reality, the facts say otherwise. And in reality, the actual facts tell a far different story than what we are hearing day after day after day after day after day about systemic racism. Let's start with the most recent annual report of the Census Bureau, Income and Poverty in the United States 2019. According to this report, annual real median household income in the United States increased 6.8% in 2019, the largest amount of increase recorded by the Census Bureau going back to 1967. But Black median household income in 2019 increased 7.9%, the largest on record. And per the American Enterprise Institute's economist Mark Perry, almost 9 times the average annual income of 0.9% over the last half century. There's more. There's more about Black progress in this country. In 2019, 29.4% of Black households had incomes of $75,000 or more, compared to 28.7% of Black households that had income of $25,000 or less. To appreciate this, in 1967, 44.5% of Black households were low-income households compared to just 9.1% high income. 2019 was the first time ever that the percentage of high-income Black households exceeded the percentage of low-income Black households. And there's still even more. Last September, the Federal Reserve published a survey of consumer finances, published once every 3 years. The survey covered the 3-year period of 2016 to 2019, just prior to the onset of the pandemic. I know it's a lot of numbers, guys. Maybe you can watch it over and over, but it's important, these numbers, because over a period per the report, Black net worth increased 32.1%. Hispanics, they went up too, 63.6%. But white, the net worth increased only 4%. Per the same Federal Reserve report, business equity among African Americans increased 138%. And how about other measurements of achievement? Well, per the Census Bureau, in 2019, 88% of Blacks had a high school diploma, 98% of the national average. Compare that to in the 50s. The percentage of Blacks with a high school diploma equaled about 50% of the national average. I'd say some progress is being made. In 2018, 37.8% of Black ages 18 to 24 were enrolled in college, compared to a national average of 40.9%. In this age group, I'm telling you, this is what you heard last week, the hope that the pastor and others gave. It's true. We're starting to see some trends moving in the right direction. Unfortunately, you don't hear them on regular news to know that Black community is not doing so bad, since it was Civil Rights Act of '64 that opened all college doors in the first place. In the age group of 25 to 39, 28.4% had a bachelor degree or higher. Compare that with 40.5% of the general population. Oh, and here's some news that you might not have heard. The Black high school dropout rate in 2018 was 4.9%. Compare that to national average of 5.7%. You know, I know the pictures are just like endless about how bad Blacks are doing in the country, but the data shows another story. Am I trying to divert attention from the real issues, the economic and social problems in many Black communities? Certainly not. But what I do wish to disabuse is this focus on problems that are central in certain Black communities and using this data to generalize about all Blacks. It's certainly false. It's distortion, and ironic how often the stereotyping is coming from those who pretend that they're fighting racism. So this week on Cure America, my distinguished panel and I are going to address the economic realities affecting the state of Black America. Last week, we looked inside the social realities of issues like marriage and family, education, abortion. So now we're going to look inside issues of savings, housing, income, and assets. So let's again prepare our hearts to sort through the noise of the news to find some truth on this incredibly critical topic. And we'll do that right after this important message.
Let's take a quick history lesson. Just 2 centuries ago, 94% of the people in the world lived in extreme poverty. Today, it's 8.5%. In a century, our life expectancies more than doubled. How did we come so far so fast? The freedom to create, to start a business, to keep what you earn. Don't let the socialists and radical left cost us our progress, our freedom, and our well-being. It's time we fight for America and vote for America.
Let's look into the economic realities of the state of Black America. And I've got an amazing panel again this week for you. Jonathan, of course, is going to always be with me unless he's on vacation with his wife. Jonathan Alexandria, attorney and senior counsel of government affairs at Liberty Counsel Action. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know why you have to always be with me is because you keep me out of jail. You make sure that they don't come after me and attack me. And if they do, I have legal recourse.
That's what we're here for.
And it's also your brilliant mind because you take us to a perspective on these issues that we really appreciate. And now a friend that you guys have not met, but he's been a friend of mine for more than 30 years, Horace Cooper. Horace Cooper is senior fellow with the National Center for Public Policy Research, co-chair of the Project 21 National Advisory Board, and a legal commentator. Horace has 30 years of experience here on Capitol Hill and in national politics. And I think you must have had more than 30 years because I've known you 30 years. And you were here when I got here, so you look very young. I'm glad that neither one of us are aging. But thanks for joining us on such a critical topic. It's really going to be an interesting discussion. And then a new person for you as well, not new for us here at CURE, Nico Carroll. He's a rising star right here internally at the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. His background is from Florida. In fact, he grew up in a political family. I know his mom. He grew up in a political family, a politically right family. And then most recently, he was the Black Outreach Director for the Trump campaign in Florida. Thanks for joining us. In fact, you were a part of the Black Voices that so many heard.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. And I think that you probably can give us a whole lot of insight into what happened there with DeSantis, because remember, in education, he went right into the Black community, and that's one of the reasons he won that governorship.
Absolutely. I mean, in the Black community, it's all about education and opportunity, and really grasping, the knowledge and the power that comes along with it to advance yourself in this society.
Yeah, and I think that someone told him that messaging, so we're glad that you were part of the team to get that messaging, because he did it and beat an African American who was running on nothing but government. But Black women came out for DeSantis, and he took that one, and now he's a real rising star in the Republican Party. Some say even presidential. But that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, or maybe indirectly it does. We're talking, Jonathan's like, you're darn right it does.
Of course it does.
Because it does. Public policy does impact our lives, and in particular, those that are really crippled by some of the policies that came out of the 60s. And this excessive government. We talked about the last segment, State of Black America, last week, the social realities, family, marriage breakdown, abortion, these impacts. But today I want to really get into some of the economic side of these questions. We keep hearing about the wealth gap, the disparities. I am going to just ask questions, and I want to throw it out there and you guys answer them, okay? Because I don't want to do round robin. I don't want to take over the whole swaying of the show. I really want us to get into what others that are listening to us need to know about the realities in Black America. So question number one is, Blacks appear to be making more income, yet the savings rates are dismal. Black buying power was at $1.1 trillion as of 2015, yet only 45% of Black adults participate in employee-sponsored retirement plans. Why aren't more Blacks saving? Is there an obstacle that we should be thinking and talking about? Jonathan?
Yeah, I think one thing that you have mentioned in previous shows, the discrepancy between white wealth and Black wealth, have a lot to do with student loans, and it's something that the African American community does need to address. I mean, we've bought into it, rightly so, that education is going to be the path forward, but the investment on the type of education we've been getting and whether or not our salary is able to balance out the crippling amount of student debt that there is certainly one issue. Where I'm from in Massachusetts, where blacks are just as educated as whites, but because of student debt, there's a huge discrepancy between the wealth factor.
And that's interesting because, go ahead, because I want to hear about this.
I had a book that came out, HarperCollins, How Trump is Making Black America Great Again. It came out 4th of July, 2020. Mm-hmm. I had a chapter on the income and wealth situation within Black America and policies that work and policies that we need to adopt. We have, as a community, had a bad strategy, one that lacked diversification. Now, people who do investment, they know about diversifying, but what about career choices? Okay. A disproportionate number of Black Americans choose public sector employment. And you have a hard time finding the stories of the multimillionaire who worked for the Postal Service or the multimillionaire who was a civil servant in their local state government. Now, we're not saying, I don't say, don't take a job working for the city, but what I would say is keep your eyes open to some of the opportunities in the private sector because there are substantial opportunities for growth. When you start looking at those blacks who have chosen not to converge in the government sector as employers, you still don't see the same level of wealth creation as you see among white America, but you see a greater degree of wealth attainment. And, and that comes to us.
You know, that is true. And I'm wondering because is it generational as well? Because there was a time that blacks were convinced that go to public sector. I mean, we were looking at 20 years ago, 65% of Black middle class actually worked for some form of government. To your point, Jonathan, about education, that, wow, your career choice in college does make a difference. You're borrowing the same money, but if you choose a career that's only going to pay you $40,000 a year as opposed to one that's going to pay you $400,000 a year, that's a challenge. But I'm wondering then, Nico, you're looking at the young men. You're a very young man, and we appreciate that you're going to share some of the insight that you have on these very critical questions. I'm wondering if generationally, are we seeing that shift that Horace brought up about what he alluded to in his book, that he talked about in his book actually extensively, that, guys, if you put all your eggs in one little basket, public sector, not only are you going to bloat government, but you're not getting wealthier. Or younger African-American males in particular who did vote disproportionately for President Trump, are they starting to get a sense that they want to accumulate wealth?
Well, honestly, along with the education piece and, again, the opportunity side on going from public to private, it has to deal with the culture and the influence that's now being portrayed out there on social media, in the news outlets. And what a lot of young people are seeing is that, hey, I spend now, I make money now, I spend it now. I make money now, I spend it now. And that's really where a lot of our economic problems come from, is from, I need this now, I see this, I need it now.
But why are we seeing that? Is it because now, last show we talked about marriage breakdown, so is it now so individualized and materialistic that that's why we're seeing this? Or is
I believe that society and the Black community has become more individualized as opposed to community oriented. Okay. You hear about Black love, you hear about, you gotta love your skin color, but again, that stemmed from being a network in a community. Having that, family core unit with the mother, father, and them teaching those values to their sons and to their daughters. And now we're not really seeing that.
We're not seeing that because we're not seeing the savings rates at all. But that's really interesting because even in preparing for the show, I was like, I stay in a community here in Washington, D.C. where there's a Gucci and a Vuitton, and people are staying in 100-degree weather. Black people, lots of them. In fact, the majority of them, to get these $1,000 sneakers and $2,000 purses.
Yeah, we're such a consumption-based society, and it's something that absolutely needs to change. The narrative, as you're saying, is shifting. I mean, we're seeing Black men step into entrepreneurship roles and saying that I can hang out my own shingle, I can be sort of the king of my economic castle. And I think that's a great move, but the spending is right there with it. And we do have, for our faults, a sort of exhibitionist society. It's something that I think we've in some ways inherited.
Some of it in the culture says that, in order for you to get that respect that you think you deserve, you got to look the part.
And there's a pejorative term that goes with it, and it's being hood rich, right? As soon as, an African American starts getting money, they spend it to show that they have it. And that's something that we can culturally challenge one another and say, put that somewhere else, put it in the house savings.
Yeah,
and-
let me agree on this because I want to, because put it in.
There's an elephant in the room, and that is, and in many instances, so-called leaders within the Black community come up with excuses, and they tell us about the white boogeyman. And every time you have a problem, if there's a literacy gap, it's the white boogeyman. If there's a wealth gap, it's the white boogeyman. If there's an incarceration gap, it's the white boogeyman. And there's never a lot of leaders who will say to us, we control our fate and we make choices, and that we should be mindful of those choices. We should, as a strategy, and I say this in one of the chapters in my book, as a strategy to make mathematics attainment, science attainment a key element of what it means to be a young person growing up in America.
I know, but it's interesting because even the president, we talked about it last time, that he said, Black entrepreneurs can't have lawyers, they don't know accountants. Like, when they put something on a 33% off sale, we know how to calculate. And if you know how to live off of $400 a month from the federal government on welfare, obviously you have some skill set to learn these types of things. So what is it? Is the materialism coming because the culture has shifted to where we even have a disdain for wealth? I mean, we're hearing a whole lot about Marxism and progressivism.
Well, I'd like to add that a lot of what we have nowadays is in company with technology. Our phones are basically our computers, our lifeline. Yeah. So when we see how fast we can see something, we can get it just as fast too.
No, that's true.
So it has
I
come
bought a whole
with
lot
the
of
times.
stuff during COVID that
Amazon is there.
I didn't even have anywhere to wear it.
Exactly. So when we look at that, a lot of the opportunities that people see are in that public set. Hey, you could be an entrepreneur, you could do this, but they're not telling you how they're truly getting there to be an entrepreneur. They're not saying you have to have a credit score of this. You have to have this amount of capital to get started.
That's right.
They just see the end result.
That's right.
So there's a gap between that journey to become that successful individual. They're not telling you how many pitfalls were taken. Right. Just spend $100 on my course and I'll show you how.
Well, it's not just them though, because we have a whole lot of Black liberal athletes and others that are also not saying what work went into them getting there. My goodness, and they act like they don't save any of their money either. Mm-hmm. Some of them I know don't. But maybe it's just a mathematical equation that can say, dude, we got it. You're getting the income now, but maybe you should put 10% away for the rainy day. Mm-hmm. You mentioned home ownership. It's dismal. 44% of Blacks own a home. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, so much as the complaints about, well, we can't get the capital. Well, how much of that capital is attached to the marital couples who can then go to their in-laws to say, hey, we want to go buy a house? No one's buying a house from someone that's cohabitated. They're not going to go into their equity for somebody that's kind of living a lawless life. Am I off or something?
Well, we have some generational challenges, and this is not beat down on Black America, but it's about, let's talk truthfully.
I want to talk truthfully.
We have some challenges. For one thing, one of the more successful strategies in the past is younger people stay with their parents and save so that they can become independent. You know why we don't want to stay with our parents now? Oh, of course the media says that's uncool, but the real reason is mothers and fathers have advice for us, and if we sit in their house, we have to hear that advice, and we don't want to hear that advice.
But it's some of this culture though pushes everybody out of the home now. It's almost like it's in the culture that if you ain't moved by 17, something's wrong with you.
That's a failure strategy we can't afford. We need to be pushing the opposite direction. How long? How many days? What will we gain when we stay here? And by the way, it turns out some of our older people in our lives have really good life learned experience to share with us. And when we say we don't want to hear it, then we're the losers.
And what he's mentioning, you said generational living. That's something that if we can lay blame at the feet of government, the way that government has come in and interrupted what was a natural intergenerational relationship where parents were able to see their kids as a benefit. They would help in the type of work and labor that the parents would do, and then they could rely on their children to pick up that work later on and take care of them. But now we have government interjecting themselves in terms of educating children and interjecting themselves in terms of taking care of the parents in their
and housing and
I've got some questions I want to ask you because that's a big one, housing and retirement.
I was saying the distinction between African American and white families, that white families knew to pass the money on and start IRAs and Roth IRAs for the children very early on in their life so that the children had something later on to grow into.
Well, you've just read my next question, because it is true what you just said. Blacks have disproportionately low net worth. In 2016, average wealth of households with a head identifying as Black was $140,000, while the corresponding level of white-headed households was $901,000, nearly 6.5 times greater. What role does housing policy play? Why do certain neighborhoods continuously struggle with building an economy so housing values, thus net worth, doesn't increase? I mean, what's standing in the way? Is it all about family?
Well, I'd say something quickly, just at that housing point. Something that Democrat politicians have done a very disservice of is these rent limitations that they're placing on individuals, where you, because you want, as they call it, equal housing or Fanderson housing, they place these rent limitations that are not allowing the individual that owns the home to recoup the full value of the home in rent or the building. And that affects the community. The taxes aren't being paid, the property tax isn't increasing, that's not being paid, and that directly affects the community. But you'll hear that it's helping us out because everyone is able to afford rent now, when in terms of the actual property value, we're lowering that, and that ultimately
Just the
affects the
fact that
community.
HUD's in the business, they set the price.
Exactly.
It's really bad. Yeah.
So you got two issues here. On the one hand, you have the significant market distortions that government brings into the housing arena, and it makes it a challenge. You've got places like California that have all but made it illegal. They haven't actually, but they have all but made it illegal for new houses to be built. And that has created an artificial scarcity. At the same time, there is a strategy that the successful have, which is, if there ain't no jobs here, I'm going to go to where there are some.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
increasingly are seeing in Black communities people refusing to adopt that strategy. And the beauty is, if you leave here, you might be able to go to a place where housing is more affordable, where housing is more attainable, as well as the economic opportunity. So some of this is, in fact, government market distortion, but some of it is the cultural strategy that exists in communities. And when those communities adopt those strategies, it leads to failure.
How deep is it, Nico, that is like, I'm moving. I don't care if this neighborhood has nothing of value, and I don't care if I can't grow. I don't care if I can't find a job. I'm staying here. Because, Horace, you're bringing up something that really does need to be addressed. When you think about the prices in cities, they're far greater than prices in the suburb. But yet, is it in the culture that Black folks say, ooh, if I live in the suburbs, I've sold out?
Well, honestly, I wouldn't necessarily say it's about selling out. It's about the innate want to make something of your own. So they don't want to leave or abandon ship because they're afraid of change. Again, a lot of folks that are in Black communities stay there for generations because they're afraid to leave. And it's not so much because, oh, well, I can't find a job elsewhere. If you go on the internet, you can find almost anything.
Most people don't. They get comfortable. I mean, you think even coming out of slavery, there are 4 million and only 1 million left the South.
Exactly.
There is a comfort about it.
It's about being afraid to leave.
I'll get up out of there, I'm telling you. But
like,
then others
for example,
did.
my father, he's from Miami, from Liberty City. He was born in the 50s, grew up in the 60s, so it was bad with drugs at the time. But he knew he wanted to get out. He had brothers and sisters that stayed back. He went into the military. But being in that environment, he was like, look, I could have either stayed in this environment or I could have gone on for more opportunity. There are more than enough opportunities out there for young Black men and women. This is about, do you want it? It's all about the individual. It's not about what we can do. It's about what can you do. Exactly.
Well, that's an interesting point, getting out of the collectivism. So how deep is collectivism in our culture now? Is it something that maybe we can turn around? I mean, or is this younger generation starting to say, we've heard the political promises for the last 60 years. We saw that it didn't work for grandma. We see it really didn't work for mom. Are they going to break out?
I think it's afraid of being yourself and being an individual. Because again, we've all been in those circles. We're all Black conservatives. We've been in those liberal circles where like, oh, you're a conservative and you're being poked fun at.
Yeah.
A lot of folks aren't strong enough to take that. Some people don't have thick skin, have been told, hey, it's okay to be an individual. You could think for yourself, it's all right. They're afraid to hear the rhetoric that comes along with that.
And there's a lot of rhetoric, and especially now they've turned the temperature up, that the progressives are now showing up at people's houses threatening their kids if they speak out of their orthodoxy. So I'm just wondering, the blacks have always just had such a resilience. I'm just surprised a little bit to hear that black men who certainly don't have any problem taking control of their communities when it comes to I'm the man, that they would be afraid to jump off into what we might consider mainstream culture. Because I'm with Horace on this. We can learn mathematics. We do big business, and we can do big business. So where do we go? I want to know.
We got failing schools that don't allow us. We're having a national conversation about critical race theory. Our children do not need to waste any time on the 1619 Project or critical race theory. They need literacy attainment, mathematics attainment, scientific attainment. If they achieve at exceptional levels, there is nothing that is going to hold those people back. But we got our school leaders, many of them have faces that look like yours and mine, saying, no, math is some sort of Western civilization creation, and we don't want to get our kids going down that aisle. That is crippling. So in this city, they had a big conversation a few years ago about legalizing marijuana. I thought that was the biggest waste of time. Our schools still fail here. Our homes, marriages are still at record lows. That's what people actually need. If you want them to be free, you want them to be happy, you want them to be able to pick up the skills so that they can become independent. Giving them drugs, teaching them sociological nonsense and the like might feel good for an hour or two, but it will cripple a generation.
Well, it already is.
Yeah, and there's a system, an economic system to come full circle, economic system that's built off this, and it's communism, right? We have to call it for what it is, and and that's ultimately what it is. The government's going to, if things are going wrong, we'll step in, and you've already seen that. They're hooking us, hook, line, and sinker in their employment checks that thankfully are reduced in the last month, but these unemployment checks that were being shelled out from government every month, telling people you can sit at home and government's going to pay you. They did this under the pretext of COVID recovery, but it's getting us used to a product.
Absolutely.
And that's, we've already seen it in the government welfare core. We've already seen what happens when you allow government to take over every interest in a community. We can look at any of our 6 zip codes. So why are others adopting this?
Why are we letting it happen?
Into it?
I mean, folks need to know the alternative. We need to be.
I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, we need to present the alternative of the free market, of the ability to come to the marketplace with a product or an idea that someone else is willing to pay. The only place that government has a role in is equaling the playing field, so that if you're the little man, you can't be taken advantage by the big man. But if you're a big man, you can not be taken advantage by the little man either. Government can't pick winners and losers. It can't be respective of persons. It just needs to set out an equal playing field.
Wealth tax. Oh, we got them on the income tax, but there's not enough income there, so maybe we'll just go after wealth. But what was your comment?
I would like to add, to that thought, and just to continue the conversation with it, is that promoting more vocational opportunities.
Absolutely.
Because again, when we talk about opportunities, we talk about education. It's a lot more than just the books you see in the college, liberal colleges. It's more so about what can you do with your hands. Yes, the mathematics and science is important, but sometimes, like you mentioned, the school system is not teaching that fully. Where can you get that? The apprenticeships.
The government needs to get out of the education.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. Because even to your point, Nico, there's just such an insistence and now such a political correctness that's entered the corporate world that the very people that could be handling these apprenticeship jobs and teaching the skills needed to go to a Google or go to an Amazon or go wherever you need to go to move into the 21st century, they're fighting against it. They're building out bigger government. They're making sure that most people just stay. How many of them are buying into communism? That's what I think.
And that's the thing. You'd think corporations would be on the out front against
leaders to say, come on, guys, everybody has a skill they can put on the table.
It seems to be a cultural thing that's all consuming. Maybe it came in through the back door and they didn't realize what it is, but they've bought into it.
Oh, no, they knew what it was. And we were together when we were fighting affirmative action. When they saw it coming, when it was still just a little baby, no, they mine. I want to build my thing, and I don't mind monopolizing to kick the little guy out. So I'm going to let the unions control all the narrative.
Let's also not forget that a lot of the folks that we see wearing the nice ties and the nice suits, sitting in the C-suites, are coming from educational institutions that poison them about America and that poison them about the free market.
Yeah, that's what our colleague here at Cure says all the time, that, when he first showed up in Washington, when Reagan showed up in Washington, you had a generation then of free market thinkers in the corporate world. So they would kind of do what they needed to do and hire lobbyists to try to keep their businesses alive. But now we're looking at a generation that actually believes that stuff.
That's right.
It's one thing when Jesse Jackson was shaking down corporations. It's another when BLM is saying, give us your money, because they believe it. So they're buying they're not just paying off the agenda, they're buying the agenda. I'm wondering if we can turn this around. So I have a couple more questions that I want to ask my panel. So I hope you stay with us after this message. I've got a few more, and then we're going to get to some solutions too, because you guys have brought up some really, really interesting points, and I think to point a different picture about what's happening in Black America, especially with that Black male. I'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Franklin Graham. We've got a new year in front of us, 2021, and new opportunities. But for many, we've got the same old problem. There's that emptiness in your heart, and you've been trying to fill it with drugs and alcohol and sex and everything else, but it just doesn't work. You've been searching, but you don't even know what you're searching for. God is the only one who can fill that vacuum. If you've never trusted His Son, Jesus Christ, as your Savior, do that today. You see, Jesus took our sins. He died on the cross. He was buried, and God raised Him to life. And He can come into your heart and change you and forgive you. Just pray this prayer with me right now. Just say, God, I'm a sinner. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I believe Jesus is your Son, and I want to trust Him today as my Savior. I want to invite Him to come into my life and take control. If you prayed that prayer, call that number that's on the screen. Do it right now. Call that number. Someone's willing to speak with you right now. Call that number. God bless.
Wow, I'm learning so much. In particular, that Horace has a new book. I don't know how I missed that. He's such a good friend. And then I thought, because it's been a year of COVID, we lost touch with everybody. But this important topic, the state of Black America, I hope that you're following this information. Good thing it's taped, huh? So that way you can always get it at curepolicy.org to listen to over and over again. I hope it's not too many numbers for you, but it's important. We have to go through them. So my panel again, Jonathan Alexandra, he's with us. Horace Cooper, he's with us out of Washington, D.C. Nico Carroll, who's now in Washington, D.C., but by way of Florida, has been working more on the political side, but now coming into the policy side here at Urban Cure. So we really appreciate you being here with us. Okay, so guys, we have so much to cover, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I have a couple of questions I know I want to get to, and then we're going to open it up to have discussion. So this one, Black seniors, okay, they have the lowest level of assets upon retirement. And too often their families end up passing a hat to cover the funeral costs upon their death. What obstacles keep Blacks from investing in insurance? Would personalizing Social Security help alleviate seniors from living in poverty? So it's two questions. But the question on insurance, it has to be addressed because, Nico, you mentioned it. Oh yeah, we want it today. We're living it today. We're going to look at today. What about insurance? Mm-hmm. You do have a family, you have children. What's broken down that we don't even think about? Is this related to marriage breaking down and we're too individual? Honestly,
I think it's more so about that individual ideology that we all live in today. Even with the older folks, they think of themselves. Again, sadly to say, a lot of grandparents in the Black community take care of, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren. So it's very hard for them to pass anything along because they're doing so much to give to that next generation already. Okay. When it should be that parents' responsibility to pass that along.
And not only pass along, but to be helping the senior. There's
exactly.
Something has broken down. There are values perhaps we've missed. So I'm going to, Horace, I know that you have a lot to say on this, but I want to go to Jonathan because it brings it back to marriage. And you're
Absolutely.
the only one on the panel that's married. And we were talking about the spending habits of the singles, and we're all admitting that we're in it. But married couples don't do that. There's much more value, it seems, to marriage than just making sure they get a quality education or have really traditional values by taking them to church. Even spending habits, and investing habits.
Absolutely. When you're an individual, you live for yourself. I mean, your focus is on attainment and getting it all done. But when you're for the first time in marriage, you're divesting yourself of full autonomy and full individual control and saying, I'm pairing my life with this other individual. Where are we going together? And if you've made that commitment to each other as you do in marriage, then there becomes a rub. It's a rub that God created. He allowed Eve to become the opposer to Adam. Literally what the word helpmate means is to oppose, to say, hey, but what about this? And that's the exchange that God anticipates for a male and a female when they join together in union, to say, we've set a goal that we want to have this, or we need this particular comfort, or our children need this. We can't go spending the way we were as individuals. Together, we have to make a decision and hold each other accountable to get there.
This is interesting because when you look at the rates of marriage fall, we actually have fallen in our housing ownership.
Right.
It's worse. It was getting a little bit better. So this is fascinating.
I would say quickly,
the way that you've explained.
I would say quickly, single men pay rent. Married people pay mortgages.
Wow.
Single men and women, you're fine just shelling out that housing allowance for rent. When you're married, you invest in a mortgage, and ultimately it's housing and home ownership that equalizes the wealth gap.
And help break out of poverty as well.
I think we also need to observe how the role of the church has changed in the 21st century versus in the 20th century. Now, my grandmother, her husband died early. He was in his 60s when he died.
Where does she live?
She lived in Polk County. She's passed now. But before she
Polk
died...
County, where is that?
Polk County, Texas.
Oh, Texas. Okay, so they were from Texas.
Before she died, she paid cash to have her home built.
Wow.
Now, she already had a home, and she owned the land next to the home, and she paid cash to have a new, what we called a brick home built next to it.
In Texas.
In Texas.
In the heart of Jim Crow South and all this Juneteenth that we keep hearing about.
She got up 3 times a week to make it to the local church, where the pastor in that church talked about very, very practical things that were useful. It wasn't just marriage counseling, which is extremely useful, and we're not seeing a lot of it in many of our churches, but they also talked about the practical things about putting off this emergency need to satisfy myself today. Self-gratification.
Yeah, what the scripture called the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. The same thing that Jesus was tempted on the mountain from the devil. And that's what I'm hearing you say.
Yes.
That
And so her pastor
off.
helped her when she was a single woman to find my grandfather because he was active in the church and someone that could make a reliable partner.
What do you mean helped her find him? Like
Actually
matchmaking?
Said matchmaking.
Need more of that.
We look around today and our church is more interested in a voter registration drive. I'm not opposed to a voter registration drive, but let's talk about what will really improve the lives of people.
That is interesting, and we need to take a pause because that's exactly right. So keep going because this is exactly right, and that is exactly what they're preaching these days. And it's not practical, and they're in poor communities. Everything around them is broken, and then they're wanting to do voter registrations. Too much focus on government, you think?
A lot more about the kinds of things. Chastity needs to be talked about more in our communities.
That's right.
We have young people who are getting pregnant and they're bringing young people that they're ill-equipped to provide any financial support for, but they also can't provide any moral support for. And now that is a drag, as you've talked about, on the parents of those parents.
Right.
And so funds that they could be using to set aside for the future are taken away. Our church, our community, our folks really need to be focusing in, zeroing in. There are other communities.
I'm so glad you bring this up because you know what? We're the most church. And
yes,
that's
we
why
are.
I wanted to do this
and
show because we go to church more than any other people groups in our society, and yet we are the sickest.
Yeah, we need our churches to do the kinds of things that is worthy of the amount of time and attention that we provide to them. I welcome the church into the public square. I just think that the church which has the capability of solving so many of the problems that human beings face, has been walking away from that role and has decided that it's got other fancier objectives, leaving the hurting broken people to figure it out on their own.
Well, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it started, someone mentioned in last week's segment about how Margaret Sanger said, let's go after those black pastors. So a lot of it's of money. They're driving bigger, they're finer. They pretend that they're married to that one woman while they're running around the town. And then they are really focused on political. So, Nico, I'm just wondering, though, because we've had a year of COVID, and I actually had $5 on the table that we would see a marriage boom, that we would see a baby boom. And then the numbers came out in December that it didn't happen. I lost my $5. But we're still in that 9 month. It could happen and I could get my money back. But I'm just wondering, even when you think that, oh, I've got it all because I've lived for today, I've got all this fancy stuff, to sit a year alone, do you think that that's going to kind of shift those younger people to say, maybe we ought to consider the values of our great-grandparents, it sounds like now, not even just their grandparents?
Sadly, it's probably going to exemplify what they've already been thinking as far as I'm okay by myself, unfortunately. Yeah. Because again,
TV and stuff.
Exactly. You have all these things to distract you and, to the point of, having that companionship and also having the match to say, hey, look, this person can suit me. Nobody these days are really looking for a partner that, hey, what can they add to my life?
And that's what they should be looking for.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. From a monetary standpoint, from a moral standpoint,
yes.
From, just a forward vision on how can we live this life together and not just separate as an individual. Oh, does this look like...
You're saying more are looking or more are not?
Are not looking.
They're not.
So
Yeah, they're
a lot
not.
of folks, and I speak for kids in my generation, they're looking at, oh, she looks like somebody that I could just show off to my friends. Or, oh, she looks good. She maybe look good in 10 years. I want to stay with her. And vice versa with the women and men. But in all reality, that's not what the true companionship is about. It's about, hey, look, are you going to be able to raise my son or my daughter? And are we going to be able to build this life together like my parents
did? Like what you were saying, to build a life together, to set long-term goals. Are we going to be able to turn it around, guys?
Well, that affects retirement. That affects savings. That's the point here, is that we have to start going back to some of the core, I refer to these as success strategies. And there are communities in America, when you look, they are disproportionately using success strategies, and they prosper as a result of it.
Now, we make fun of them. This Asian. It's also the immigrants from Africa. It's also the immigrants from Caribbean. So this is not about ethnicity and melanin in the skin.
It's about morality. You're absolutely right.
It is.
And the examples that we have in Scripture, a bad example for marriage, but a good example in terms of what the right perspective is Solomon, who, if he wanted to chase and be an exhibitionist and show all his wealth, he could have done that. And he could have asked God for it. But he was following a calling. And I think that's one thing that we need to start instilling in folks.
He even said so. He said, I did it all. Hey, listen, guys, I want to take a little break right now because we need to get this important message in. And when we come back, I want to talk about the solutions. You're already on it. I want to hear more about Solomon. And we will right after this message.
Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
Let's take a quick history lesson. Just 2 centuries ago, 94% of the people in the world lived in extreme poverty. Today, it's 8.5%. In a century, our life expectancies more than doubled. How did we come so far so fast? The freedom to create, to start a business, to keep what you earn. Don't let the socialists and radical left cost us our progress, our freedom, and our well-being. It's time we fight for America and vote for America.
I could go another hour on this, and I know that you would want to hear another hour. So I've told the panel we've got to keep digging deeper into these questions. As long as they're pushing critical race theory and all this race dynamic that are flooding into our streets and now defunding our police. And we're going to keep talking about it here on Cure America. So I want to thank Jonathan and Horace and Nico for being with us. We didn't even touch on personalizing Social Security. Will this alleviate poverty, not just for seniors today, but what about tomorrow? What about the savings of these young people? But my final question then would be on this segment is we saw record numbers of Black Americans start businesses after taxes and regulations were cut in the 2017 tax bill. Then COVID hit. Will these new entrepreneurs stay the course? What's needed for these new businesses to recover? Because I think that one answer to a lot of this is when you own more, you take care of that more. It's like many have said, I've never seen a man wash a rented car. You mentioned rent versus ownership. When they have money in their pocket and they got a little bit of savings in there, or they have their own business, then marriage corrects, I would think. I mean, what do you guys think?
I think you're right. To the point you made about what you're amassing, Solomon said, cast your bread upon the water and it'll come back. So investments, but also I like using him as an example because he saw his calling from God as very distinct. And when God asked him what he wanted wisdom so he could continue his calling. In terms of entrepreneurship, that's what we ought to be teaching. What is your calling? Because that answers your questions when you have good days and bad days. That allows you to stay the course in business. That allows you to pursue through all financial situations because you're looking for a calling. It even helps alleviate folks out of poverty. If we're just helping the poor to become big spenders, the earn and consume treadmill, then we're never going to help them out of poverty. But if we're saying, what is first your calling? How do you pursue these things? It'll help you save for later. It'll help alleviate all these temporary financial troubles because you're looking towards something that God has placed on you to achieve.
And sometimes that is just the desire for that, what you call brick house. This, that some people
the American dream.
The American dream, just simple lives, but their own life.
Yeah.
That's not what we have today. We got government life.
Yeah, there is a real disconnect. One of the reasons I'm a big fan of entrepreneurship is the disconnect is so many elites in America say that to be Black, particularly male, is to be at a disadvantage. And yes, we have a higher percentage of Black men who have had arrests or convictions or even have served prison time than the population at large. The beauty of entrepreneurship is customers aren't actually interested in whether you check the box or not. They want to know, is your idea a good one? Is it creative? If you come over and you've got a yard service, if you've got a pool service or a plumbing service or whatever it is that you're offering, if you do that amazingly well, that is going to be the testimonial going forward. The real problem, the real problem as I see it is that we denigrate people who try to do this, who try to strive, who try to achieve, and we should be rewarding it. When the President of the United States says, you didn't build that, that is saying it's not worth it. It's not worth it for you to try. Everybody else has to do your job for you. That's false. The truly successful among us, they didn't win the lottery and they didn't steal it. They were creative and they worked their tails off.
And they're the millionaire next door.
If we do that in our community, that's what we'll be.
That's exactly right. And in fact, we have a clergy program here at Cure, and they have a book program, and one of the books is The Millionaire Next Door. People, when they take care of the details of their life, they save, they invest, they fare well, and some don't wear it in the public. So I'm wondering, Nico, are we going to be able to turn it around? You guys are enough youth listening to be able to help turn that trend, because they were the ones that became that entrepreneur. They grew up in middle class and upper middle class households. They may have gone out there to march with the BLMers, but they don't really buy that rhetoric. They were starting businesses. They might not have connected it that Trump passed a tax bill that deregulated and it stimulated economies that we haven't seen in generations, reduced unemployment, escalated money, a little bit more money. Will they invest it again, or did COVID take too much energy out?
What's not being explained enough to young Black individuals and entrepreneurs is that failure is good. That not succeeding is a good thing because you learn something.
Yes.
When you learn something from your failures, you're able to achieve a lot more because you know what not to do. when people hit that block, sometimes they just stop. And that's what you're seeing a lot of times in Black communities. Is that once you hit that roadblock, it's like there's going to be 10 more. I don't want to go through those, but you have to.
No, an entrepreneur. I think.
But that's what entrepreneurship is.
Is a spirit that
Exactly.
that you're closing the day and it's hard, but then tomorrow you're going to open something else because you might be called to do that.
What do you do if you're in California, if you're in Michigan, if you're in Illinois, and the governor simply says your wonderful idea that was providing for you and your family, making your mortgage payment, you can't do it any longer.
I know, but now, but will they do it again? Are we going to see? Will the entrepreneur survive?
And
Well,
it's the perspective that we give them. If we allow them to see that failure is on the path towards success, if it's not a get-rich scheme, if we're telling the true stories of folks that struggle at 3 a.m. in the morning, and if we're expanding the type of professionals that we're defining as entrepreneurship, that if you as you said, if you can cut a lawn well and you're doing it better than anyone else and want to hang out your own shingle, if we're expanding the ability for creatives and artisans to be part of the economy, if we're expanding what professionalism can be, then yes, we'll have more opportunities for people to be part of the system and be entrepreneurs.
Or even the respect level, because you mentioned how leaders look down. Can we look up? Can we build a continuity within some of our hard communities to say that yes,
part of that's on us.
Yeah.
Well,
Part of that's on us.
Yeah.
No one's used that phrase today, but there's this comment called acting white. I call being independent. And you can be independent whether you're Black, white, or brown. And the truth in America is it was just 100 years ago, as I also mentioned in my book, just 100 years ago, when Black men were the most likely to be employed in the United States of America. I wrote an article about the myths associated with labor law. And the myth came because white racists decided that Blacks were working too much, working too hard,
Why unions
and
started.
so they created new rules for unions, new regulations for workplace to make it exactly correct.
But go ahead.
We need to remember our heritage. Black men used to be seen not as, in that same period, by the way, Black men were the least likely to be incarcerated in our federal prisons. What we see today isn't true for forever. And we need to call back upon our actual history. Black men used to be the people that you wanted. If you had hard work, you called a Black man.
Okay, but
you
how do
wanted
we
to
get
get
there?
it
You've
done.
already told us that
We need to internalize that, remember that, and push back against those in our community and outside our community that talk down to us, that denigrate us. Oh, it's not your fault. The white boogeyman is the problem.
Right.
I just want to add to that thought is just that the level of pride in the work that you do doesn't matter what it is. If you're picking up trash, if you're at flipping burgers, or if you're a CEO of a company, it's the level of pride that you have to stay with the job. Again, to your point, like 100 years ago, a lot of folks didn't have the office jobs with AC. You had the hard jobs where you had to pick up and buy the bootstraps and keep it going.
But you had a mom and a dad married to each other, and you had a dad that said, I don't want to hear it because I worked even harder. So it goes right full circle, the family. Because the other day, I'm walking over here to the office, and a gentleman, you mentioned what the job is. He was the sanitation guy. He got off that truck to get ready to go in the prep store to get himself some coffee and opened the door for me thinking I was going in there. I wasn't, but just... I knew that brother had values. That's family.
Absolutely.
That's church. You mentioned the church. Will they recover would be my question to you, but you're the married one. Can we recover marriage? Can we get those values of our great-grandparents back so that we can do what Nico's talking
Absolutely, that's open. I don't think there's anything more that I can add to the cultural examples that he gave, other than if this idea resonates with you and you're listening, realize that government is never going to be the solution.
You're talking to the audience. Tell them.
The folks that are pushing large government will never provide the solutions that you're hearing today. They will always want to expand their role. They will always want to amass more of your pie and lessen the individualism and the ability that you have to live out the examples that they're talking today.
You know, psychiatrists say that the one definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. The left tells you all we got to do is another government program. All we got to do is spend a little more. All we got to do is have you give up a little bit more of your liberty. If that doesn't work, all we got to do, and then just go back and again and again. We can retain the autonomy, the independence that our community was once known for. There was a time when people actually opposed blacks, not as they denigrated them for being dangerous, for not being supporters in the community, but because they were afraid that the wealth and the opportunities were going to be taken by us. Why can't we work together, restore that message about ourselves? We're smart, we're hardworking. Those techniques actually can lead to our freedom as we head into the 21st century.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I think that the church has a role. So now, Nico, in this last minute, I want you to speak to that young girl who's 14, that young man who's 14 that's saying, whoa, but they told me this all my life. I can't make it. Mm-hmm. What would you tell them?
I would say to be who you truly are. And that means to follow your dreams and what you feel your desires are to be as an adult and how you want your life to be, whether that be with having a happy household, to follow that career choice, whether that be to go to school, follow a specific trade. There's no one path to success. There are multiple ways, and it's up to you to really follow that and truly believe in your heart and follow God's choice for you. Man. And to continue on that forward path to success. And again, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not something that's going to happen in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a year. It's something that's going to happen on a continual basis. And as long as you're able to acknowledge the good and also learn from the failures, you're going to be okay. It's not something that's going to be immediate, but again, it's a long haul. So stay with it and always be confident in yourself.
Yeah, 30 seconds to make the case for marriage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think that two are better than one. King Solomon told us one can do some things, but two together, that threefold cord is not easily broken. Marriage is an important part of what Nico just said.
Yeah, the first employer, God, employed Adam to take dominion over the earth, name the animals. Halfway through, he says, Adam, you're going to need help. You're going to need a wife next to you to help the stewardship mandate that I've given over you. She's going to come out of your rib. She's going to be the one that rubs and opposes you and keeps your head focused. Woman, there's a particular role that you have as well. It's the same God-given, image-bearing role to take dominion, and the two of them together is the exact plan that God made.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, guys. This has been incredible, and we will continue this discussion because we need to cure America. I'll be right back with the final thought.
It's time for a cure. Cure is a coalition of new voices with new ideas that will become new policies. We are the Cure. The Center for Urban Renewal and Education, headquartered in Washington, D.C., CURE works with churches, political, and business leaders on behalf of urban communities. CURE's mission is to address issues of culture, race, and poverty from a Judeo-Christian perspective. CURE. Join with us. And there has never been a better time to help Black communities.
Well, I hope that you've really enjoyed and have followed with us on the State of Black America, Part 2. We're finishing out right now. We're going to continue these discussions, as I've said over and over again, because it is certainly true, according to the Census Bureau, that in 2019, Blacks, who constitute 13.2% of the population, represent 23.8% of those living below the poverty line. But is this about racism? The data tells us that this is about family breakdown, not racism. And the problem of family breakdown is afflicting the whole nation. It just happens to be hitting many Black communities particularly hard. Poverty is excessive in households of all races that are headed by single women. Blacks just happen to have very high percentages of households headed by single women. But according to data, only 6.4% of Black households headed by married couples live in poverty. So enough of this racist generalizations about Blacks, and enough of the distortions that Blacks have not been gaining ground in our free country. and that where we do have problems, we need more government. It's not true. Black progress and achievement since the 60s has been substantial. Where problems exist and where progress is disappointing, inevitably government has been the problem, not the solution. So let's move onward to help problems be solved. Problems of despair and poverty. Let's teach the struggling in our society how to move their fate to faith, and then how to put their faith and our beloved America back on a journey towards freedom. I'm Star Parker, fighting for freedom here on Cure America. See you next time.